They were told the British would run. Not once, not twice. They were told this every single day. In training camps, in classrooms, in propaganda films, in the speeches of their officers. When German soldiers stepped into World War II, they did not arrive with empty minds. Their minds were already prepared. They had been given a story in advance. A story where the German soldier was the hero and the British soldier was weak. According to this story, the British Army was outdated, a force trapped in the glory of its past, an army surviving only on its navy and its empire. Modern land warfare, they were told, was beyond its ability. German soldiers were taught that British officers treated war like a gentleman's game, that they hid behind protocol and etiquette, that when real bullets started flying, they would collapse. This was not just rumor, it was ideology. Nazi leadership needed this story to be true, because a soldier fights best when he believes his enemy is weaker than him. And at first, everything seemed to confirm it. September 1939, Poland. German tanks, aircraft, and infantry all moving together. Poland collapsed in weeks. Then Denmark, one day. Then Norway. Then the Netherlands. Then Belgium. And then France. France, considered Europe's strongest land army. France, the nation that had stopped Germany in World War I. It fell in just 6 weeks. German soldiers marched through the streets of Paris, confidence on their faces, certainty in their steps, and a trace of arrogance. So when only one country remained, Britain, no one was truly worried. For German soldiers, it felt like a matter of time. Then came Dunkirk. Dunkirk was supposed to be routine. British and Allied forces were trapped, the sea in front of them, the German army behind them. According to every military textbook, this should have been total destruction. But the British did not do what the Germans expected. They did not surrender. They fought rear guard actions, they held positions, they bought time. And then they began to evacuate. Close up, small boats crossing the English Channel. Civilian boats, fishing vessels, pleasure crafts, day and night, under bombardment, under machine gun fire. And when it was over, more than 300,000 Allied soldiers had reached England. Nearly 200,000 of them were British. German soldiers were not just seeing numbers, they were feeling something. This was not collapse. This was a controlled retreat. Close up, a German soldier staring ahead. An army that is broken does not retreat like this. A soldier who has lost does not withdraw with this level of discipline. Dunkirk angered German command, but in the minds of German soldiers, it planted a dangerous thought. The British soldier was still alive, and a living enemy is the most dangerous kind. Cut to Britain, training camps, rebuilding. The next shock came when Britain refused all negotiation. No talks, no compromise, no surrender. German soldiers watched as the British army stood back up. Training camps filled, new units formed, old units reorganized. The same British soldiers propaganda had called cowards were carrying rifles again. This is when German soldiers stopped seeing the British through propaganda. They began observing them. How they fought, how they reacted under fire, how they retreated, and how they returned. And what shocked them most, the British soldier did not panic. Cut to handwritten German diaries and letters. German diaries and letters recorded observations. They don't shout, they don't rage, they just do their job. This was not praise, it was analysis, and for Nazi ideology, it was dangerous. The British soldier was not dramatic. He did not give speeches. He did not shout slogans. He followed orders, and when given an order, he moved forward, slowly but with certainty. Cut to British troops marching in the rain. German soldiers noticed that British units rarely broke formation, rarely lost control, rarely abandoned discipline. For them, war was not emotion, it was duty. and that unsettled the Germans. Because emotion fades, anger burns out, ideology can crack, but discipline lasts for years. Slowly, a new understanding formed in German minds. The British soldier could be defeated, but they could not be broken. This story does not come from British medals. It does not come from British speeches. It comes from the men sent to defeat Britain, men who slowly realized this war was not just about guns and tanks. It was a war of endurance, and the British soldier was built for exactly that. When German soldiers slowly began to change their opinion about British soldiers, the war was no longer just being fought with bullets and shells. It was being fought inside their minds. What they had been taught and what they were now witnessing no longer matched. Nazi Germany did not treat ideology as politics alone. Ideology was embedded into military training. A German soldier was not just trained to fight, he was trained to believe. He was taught that German discipline was superior, that German courage was unmatched, that German soldiers were naturally harder, stronger, and more modern. And for this belief system to survive, the enemy had to appear weak. The British Army was a perfect target. Its traditions looked old-fashioned. Its officers appeared calm, almost distant. Its soldiers lacked the fiery speeches and ideological slogans of the German ranks. Nazi propaganda turned this into ridicule. British soldiers were described as soft, as gentlemen playing war instead of fighting it, as men protected by the Navy and the Empire, not by real fighting ability. German soldiers absorbed this image before ever meeting a British unit, and at first, history seemed to support it. Poland collapsed in weeks. Denmark fell in a single day. Norway followed. The Netherlands and Belgium soon after. Then came France. France, Europe's largest land army. France, Britain's main continental ally, defeated in just 6 weeks. For the average German soldier in 1940, this felt like proof. Proof that speed defeated caution, that aggression crushed preparation, that modern war belonged to Germany. And now Britain stood alone. To German soldiers, Britain looked isolated, exposed, and vulnerable. It seemed only a matter of time. But Germany misunderstood something fundamental. British military culture was not built on emotion or ideology. It was built on routine. Routine survives shock. Routine survives defeat. Routine survives retreat. And this difference became visible at Dunkirk. Dunkirk was not meant to be a heroic moment. It was meant to be the end of the British Army. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers were trapped against the sea, German tanks behind them, German aircraft above them. Textbook annihilation. Instead, German soldiers watched something unsettling. British rear guards fought calmly. Units rotated in and out of fire. Orders were followed even under collapse. And then the evacuation began. Small boats, civilian vessels, fishing trawlers, day after day under constant bombing. When the smoke cleared, over 300,000 Allied troops had escaped, nearly 200,000 of them British. German soldiers understood what this meant. This was not panic. This was not chaos. This was controlled retreat. Armies that are broken do not retreat like this. Soldiers who are defeated do not obey orders like this. Dunkirk planted doubt. What followed confused German soldiers even more. Britain did not sue for peace. Britain did not negotiate. Britain did not collapse internally. Instead, the British Army reorganized, training intensified, command structures tightened, equipment was improved. German intelligence reports noted something disturbing. British morale remained stable, not high, not emotional, stable. This forced German soldiers to confront a reality they had not expected. British slowness was not incompetence, it was deliberate caution. British operations took longer to prepare, but once they began, they rarely collapsed. British command culture emphasized planning above all else. Timetables were precise, artillery schedules were calculated to the minute, infantry objectives were limited, realistic, and clearly defined. German soldiers described British attacks as predictable, but predictability brought reliability. British units rarely overextended, rarely panicked, rarely broke formation. This consistency became dangerous over time. British artillery had a profound psychological effect on German troops. German doctrine valued speed and mobility. British doctrine valued sustained firepower. British guns did not surprise, they endured. Shelling continued hour after hour, often longer than German troops expected, often longer than they could psychologically tolerate. German soldiers wrote, "When British artillery begins, time slows down." It was not just destructive, it was exhausting. Nowhere did this difference become clearer than in North Africa. Rommel and the Afrika Korps expected the British to fail in the desert. Extreme heat, long supply lines, scarce water. Instead, British logistics shocked German soldiers. Fuel arrived on schedule, water was rationed efficiently, food supplies were consistent. German troops often suffered shortages, British troops usually did not. And in war, hunger erodes discipline faster than fear. German soldiers described British camps as orderly, supplies labeled, equipment maintained, daily routines enforced. Even in the chaos of desert warfare, British soldiers created structure. To German troops raised on improvisation and aggression, this was unsettling. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect was the British soldiers' emotional distance. German soldiers fought with ideology, with rage, with belief. British soldiers fought with duty. They did not appear excited, they did not appear hateful, they did not appear desperate. They simply did their job. And calm enemies are the hardest to break. This calmness continued even in captivity. German guards expected despair. They found discipline. British prisoners queued, followed camp routines, maintained military bearing. They behaved as though captivity was temporary. German camp officers later admitted this behavior was deeply unsettling. It suggested confidence, not arrogance, but expectation. Slowly, German soldiers began to understand the true problem. The British Army was not designed for quick victories. It was designed for long wars. And long wars reward consistency over brilliance. British strength did not lie in dramatic charges, it lay in systems. Systems that replaced emotion with procedure. Systems that absorbed losses without collapse. Systems that kept functioning under pressure. By the early years of the war, German soldiers no longer underestimated British troops. They still believed they could defeat them tactically, but strategically, they were no longer sure. Ideas die the moment bullets start flying. For German soldiers, everything they had been told about British weakness collapsed not in briefing rooms or propaganda halls, but on open battlefields, under artillery fire, with death inches away. This was where belief met blood, and reality won. North Africa was supposed to be Rommel's playground. The desert favored speed, movement, surprise. German soldiers believed British forces would crack under heat, dust, and relentless maneuver warfare. Instead, they encountered something deeply unsettling. They encountered control. British defensive positions looked unimpressive at first. No dramatic fortifications, no aggressive forward movement, often just shallow trenches and scattered guns. To German troops, it looked careless, until the first attack. Artillery erupted. British artillery did not strike suddenly. It built. Shells landed with precision, then repetition, then relentless rhythm. Not chaos, calculation. German soldiers advancing across open sand found themselves pinned down, unable to move, unable to think clearly. One German infantryman later wrote, "The English wait. They let you advance. Then they erase the ground beneath your feet." What followed shocked German commanders. British units did not counterattack wildly. They counterattacked exactly where pressure was weakest. And when British attacks failed, they came back, again and again, always prepared. German soldiers began noticing a pattern. British troops rotated off the line. Fresh units replaced exhausted ones. Artillery never stopped supporting them. German units, by contrast, stayed in place longer, growing tired, stretched, and undersupplied. It felt like fighting an enemy that never slept. Then came El Alamein. El Alamein was not a battle designed to shock, it was designed to crush. For days, British artillery hammered German positions, not to break through immediately, but to exhaust. Sleep disappeared. Nerves shattered. Men stopped counting hours. German soldiers described the bombardment as mechanical. One officer wrote, "You stop waiting for it to end, you realize it won't." British infantry advanced slowly behind rolling barrages. They did not rush. They did not chase fleeing units. They advanced, halted, consolidated, and advanced again. German troops felt squeezed rather than attacked. The psychological pressure was immense. German soldiers were trained for fast victories, for decisive moments, for breakthroughs. The British offered none. Instead, they offered endless pressure. At night, the battlefield became even more terrifying. German forces were less comfortable operating in darkness. British units exploited this relentlessly. Silent patrols crept forward. Sudden flares exposed German positions. Short, violent clashes erupted, then vanished. German soldiers reported hearing boots in the dark, then gunfire, then silence. British troops disappeared as calmly as they had arrived. This pattern repeated itself far beyond North Africa. In Italy, British soldiers fought uphill through rain, cold, and exhaustion. German troops expected collapse in such terrain. Instead, British units advanced slowly, securing ground step by step. No dramatic breakthroughs, no reckless charges, just pressure. Every hill taken stayed taken. German counterattacks were met by artillery already pre-registered. Then came Normandy. German soldiers believed the Allied landings would descend into chaos once ashore. Instead, they encountered organized chaos. British troops moved cautiously through hedgerows. They cleared fields methodically. They coordinated tanks, infantry, and artillery with precision. German counterattacks were anticipated and punished. German soldiers noticed something unsettling. British troops did not chase success. They secured it. Ground was cleared. Positions were fortified. Communication lines were established. Then they waited. And when German forces tried to retake ground, British artillery responded instantly. One German NCO wrote, "The English do not rush after victory. They make sure you cannot return." Perhaps the most terrifying aspect was British discipline under fire. German soldiers were used to shouting, orders yelled, emotions spilling out. British soldiers communicated calmly, hand signals, short commands, calm voices. Even under intense fire, units held formation. This calmness unnerved German troops more than screaming ever could. In close combat, British soldiers were direct and efficient. No cruelty, no theatrics. Positions were cleared quickly. Prisoners were taken without drama. German soldiers noticed British troops did not linger. They moved on. Then came captivity. German soldiers captured by British forces expected revenge. Instead, they encountered order. Searches were firm but controlled. Medical treatment was provided to wounded prisoners. Rules were enforced strictly. This professionalism disturbed German troops deeply. It suggested confidence, not arrogance, certainty. German soldiers began sharing their experiences quietly, not openly praising the enemy, but warning each other. Do not underestimate them. Do not rush them. Do not expect collapse. By late 1944, attitudes had completely changed. British soldiers were no longer mocked. They were studied. German troops learned to fear British artillery schedules, British night operations, British counterattacks. One veteran later said, "The English never frightened us at first. They exhausted us, and then they broke us." The British soldier did not fight for spectacle. He fought for completion. Objective taken, position secured, next task, again and again. This was the cruel truth German soldiers finally understood. Wars are not won by moments, they are won by systems, and Britain had built a system designed to survive loss, pressure, and time. Germany had built one designed to win quickly. By the time German soldiers realized the difference, it was already too late. By the middle of World War II, German soldiers were no longer fighting the war they had imagined. The fast victories were gone. The clean breakthroughs had disappeared. The certainty of dominance had evaporated. And in its place came something far more dangerous than defeat: doubt. Pause. At the beginning of the war, German soldiers believed Britain was already collapsing. They believed the British Empire was outdated, too large, too slow, too dependent on tradition. German propaganda mocked British officers as rigid gentlemen, British soldiers as soft, undisciplined, and unmotivated. These ideas were repeated so often that they became unquestioned truth, until reality intervened. Cut to British soldiers calmly regrouping. What German soldiers began to notice, slowly, unwillingly, was that British soldiers behaved the same way under every condition: under attack, during retreat, in victory, in defeat. The behavior did not change, and that consistency terrified them. Pause. German soldiers were raised on ideology. Belief mattered, faith mattered, momentum mattered. Break the enemy's belief and victory follows. But the British soldier did not seem to need belief. He relied on something else: routine. Cut to British units preparing positions. British soldiers followed procedures with almost mechanical discipline: dig in, secure flanks, register artillery, establish supply lines. No dramatic speeches, no emotional displays, just repetition. German soldiers began to realize something unsettling: you cannot intimidate a system. Pause. This realization deepened during British retreats. When German forces forced British units back, they expected collapse. Instead, they observed something uncanny. British withdrawals were organized. Rear guards held calmly. Artillery covered movements precisely. Equipment was destroyed methodically to deny capture. British units regrouped with minimal confusion. One German officer later wrote, "Their retreat felt like a rehearsal. That sentence alone explains the shift. Pause. For German soldiers, defeat felt catastrophic. For British soldiers, defeat felt temporary. This difference became psychologically unbearable. Cut to POW camps. Then came captivity. German soldiers taken prisoner by British forces expected brutality. They had been taught that the enemy would humiliate them. Instead, they encountered structure. Search procedures were standardized. Guards followed rules. Medical treatment was immediate. There was no randomness, no emotional outbursts, no ideological lectures. This was deeply destabilizing, because brutality can be understood. Predictability cannot. Pause. Inside POW camps, German guards observed something disturbing. British prisoners did not behave like defeated men. They organized schedules, they held classes, they exercised daily. They created order where none was required. German camp reports repeatedly mentioned British morale as unchanged. One officer wrote, "They behave as though captivity is not an ending." That observation spread quietly among German soldiers. Pause. British prisoners spoke openly about returning home, about rebuilding, about resuming service, not as dreams, as expectations. German soldiers, meanwhile, were increasingly unsure whether they would survive the war at all. This contrast was devastating. Low, uneasy music. German soldiers also noticed British restraint on the battlefield. Villages were secured, not destroyed. Prisoners were processed, not abused. Wounded enemies were treated. This was not kindness, it was discipline. British soldiers did not act on emotion, they acted on orders, and orders did not fluctuate with mood. Pause. For German soldiers raised to believe cruelty created fear, this restraint was confusing. British control did not weaken them, it strengthened them. It prevented chaos, it preserved effectiveness. Cut to British medics treating wounded Germans. Perhaps the most psychologically damaging moment for many German soldiers came when British medics treated them. Receiving care from the enemy shattered propaganda. No insults, no hatred, just efficiency. Some German soldiers later admitted they felt shame. Others felt anger. Many felt doubt. And doubt is lethal to ideological warfare. Pause. By late 1943, something had clearly shifted. German frontline conversations changed. Earlier, soldiers discussed tactics, how to defeat the British, how to outmaneuver them. Now, conversations focused on endurance. How long supplies would last, when relief would come, whether relief would come at all. This shift marked the psychological defeat of the German army. Pause. British supply convoys became a weapon. Supplies arrived on time. Units rotated before exhaustion. Equipment was replaced. British soldiers looked tired but composed. German soldiers looked exhausted and abandoned. One German veteran later said, "The English always looked like they had a future." That sentence haunted many survivors. Pause. In Normandy, the realization became absolute. British advances were slow, painfully slow. German propaganda mocked this. German soldiers did not. They noticed something crucial. British ground once taken was never lost. Every position was fortified. Every approach was covered. Every counterattack anticipated. British commanders did not gamble. They waited. And waiting removed opportunity. Cut to German troops under artillery fire. British artillery became synonymous with inevitability, not terror, not chaos, predictability. Shells came on schedule, and schedules cannot be negotiated with. Pause. Another unsettling truth emerged. British soldiers did not seem to hate Germans. They fought them. Hatred burns fast. Duty burns long. British soldiers did not require emotional fuel. They had timetables. Low, reflective music. By late 1944, German soldiers stopped talking about victory. They talked about survival. How long could they hold? That question alone meant the war was already lost. Cut to exhausted German faces. Captured German soldiers increasingly felt relief. Relief at being alive. Relief at being removed from command structures. Some admitted something unimaginable earlier in the war. They trusted British captivity more than German leadership. This was the final collapse. Pause. After the war, German veterans struggled to explain this defeat. They did not describe British soldiers as heroic. They described them as unavoidable. One veteran said, "We did not lose to the English in one battle. We lost to them every single day. Day by day, system by system, decision by decision." Slow fade to black. This was the twist Germany never anticipated. Britain did not defeat Germany with passion. It defeated Germany with patience, with systems that absorbed loss, with discipline that survived fear, with routines that outlasted ideology. When the war finally ended, there were no celebrations inside the minds of German soldiers, only silence. The guns stopped firing. The orders stopped coming. The system they had trusted collapsed in a matter of weeks, and in that silence, one thought remained, heavy, unavoidable, and shared by thousands. They had not been defeated the way they expected. German soldiers had imagined defeat would come as a final battle, a last stand, a dramatic collapse, an overwhelming enemy charge. Instead, defeat arrived quietly, through exhaustion, through routine pressure, through an enemy that never emotionally broke. And that enemy, more often than not, wore a British uniform. For many German troops, surrendering to British forces brought a strange mix of emotions: fear of the unknown, relief that it was over, and confusion because what followed did not match expectations. British troops accepted surrender calmly. Weapons were collected, names were recorded, orders were given. No shouting, no revenge, just procedure. And in that moment, many German soldiers realized something painful. This is how the British had fought the entire war. In British prisoner camps after the war, German soldiers began talking openly, not about ideology, about experience. They compared fronts, they compared enemies, and again, the same conclusion emerged. The British soldier had been the most psychologically exhausting enemy they faced. Not the most brutal, not the most terrifying, but the most relentless. German veterans later described British soldiers using unusual words: predictable, calm, prepared, professional. These were not insults, they were admissions. One veteran said, "With the English, you never felt you were winning even when you advanced." That sentence captures the essence of it. British resistance never felt temporary, it felt permanent. After the war, as German soldiers returned home, many struggled to process what had happened. They replayed battles in their minds, not moments of heroism, but moments of realization. The first time British artillery didn't stop. The first time a British counterattack came exactly where expected. The first time a British retreat turned into a return. These moments haunted them because they revealed the truth too late. Germany had built an army for shock. Britain had built an army for endurance, and endurance won. Historians later confirmed what soldiers already knew. British military doctrine was never designed for fast victory. It was designed for sustainability. Losses were expected. Failures were planned for. Recovery was built into the system. British soldiers did not fight to prove superiority. They fought to finish tasks, task after task, day after day. German soldiers, trained for decisive outcomes, were trapped in a war that refused to end decisively. When British soldiers returned home, they did not parade endlessly. Many simply went back to ordinary life, factories, farms, families. This too confused German veterans. British soldiers did not define themselves by war. War was something they did, not something they were. This emotional separation protected them. It allowed them to endure horrors without collapsing. In post-war interviews, German veterans were often asked, "Which enemy did you most respect?" The answer surprised many. Not always the fiercest, not always the strongest, but the British, because they were consistent. One veteran said, "You could understand the English. They were always the same." In war, predictability from the enemy is not comforting, it is terrifying. German soldiers also reflected on leadership. British officers were rarely seen screaming. They issued clear orders. They delegated responsibility. They trusted their systems. German officers, by contrast, were increasingly pressured, emotional, and ideological as the war progressed. The difference became visible even to ordinary soldiers. British command structures absorbed failure. German command structures punished it. This created fear, and fear destroys initiative. British soldiers trusted their leadership. German soldiers increasingly feared theirs. Perhaps the most painful realization came years later. German veterans admitted that British soldiers never needed to dehumanize the enemy. They fought Germans as opponents, not monsters. This preserved British discipline. It prevented moral collapse. German propaganda built on hatred left soldiers emotionally empty when belief collapsed. British soldiers did not rely on hatred, so they never lost it. This difference explains why German respect for British soldiers grew after the war. Once ideology was gone, once fear faded, what remained was memory, and memory was honest. Today, historians study this respect carefully, not as myth, but as evidence. Evidence that wars are not won only by weapons. They are won by psychology, by systems, by endurance. The British soldier embodied all three. German veterans visiting war cemeteries often expressed the same emotion. Not pride, not bitterness. Understanding. Understanding that the British soldier had been fighting a different war all along, a war of patience, a war of routine, a war of survival. One German veteran, interviewed decades later, said something remarkable. "If we had fought the English longer, we would have lost sooner." He meant this: the longer the war went on, the stronger Britain became, and the weaker Germany became. Time itself chose a side. This is the final truth many German soldiers carried with them to the grave. Britain did not win because it was flawless. It won because it endured. It absorbed pain. It adapted. It refused to emotionally collapse. And in war, that may be the greatest weapon of all. The British soldier was never the loudest, never the most dramatic, never the most feared at first glance, but he was there, every day, every front, every phase, and that constancy broke an army built on speed and shock. So when we ask, what did Germans really think about British soldiers in World War II? The answer is not simple. They underestimated them, they dismissed them, they mocked them, and then they respected them.